Shop, episode 218, an expert's guide to elevating your cold brew with Matt Bushman of Alto Cold Brew. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. How the heck are you? I hope you're doing well. I'm super happy to have you here. I'm doing pretty good. But today I'm really excited to share this cold brew episode with you, especially as the season is upon us, and some might argue it's always cold brew season, but you know what I mean. Today we are going to be talking with Matt Bushman of Alto Cold Brew, and it's really going to be a super good episode. So as we get going here, I wanted to remind you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. If you are listening to this on your podcast player and you're thinking, geez, I wonder if I've subscribed. A good way to check that out, just see if that's selected on your podcast player. Hit subscribe and you'll always be updated with new episodes of Keys to the Shop. Staying updated. Got a lot of content coming out these days, so that's a good idea. Now, also, if you're listening to this and you think a friend of yours would really like this, or there's a shop out there whose staff would really appreciate this content, I would encourage you to share these episodes, share this content around, and spread the love. It'd be really awesome, and thank you in advance for doing that. And your friends will thank you as well. Today's episode is brought to you by the ever-amazing Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee really is one of the world's best specialty coffee equipment suppliers. Their passion is to help equip you for success in specialty coffee. And of course, that means the best commercial coffee equipment from all over the world, as well as restaurant equipment such as under-counter refrigeration, so that your commercial equipment needs are set. But also they are equipping you with knowledge, because when you go to their website, prima-coffee.com, you'll see the equipment, and it's amazing. You'll also see that they have a great resource in their blogs and videos to help equip you to make great coffee, make latte art, and use the equipment and teach you a bit about what you're purchasing. And they work with you to make sure that you're getting the right equipment for your situation. So these are great partners to have if you're in the market for commercial coffee equipment. I would definitely recommend you partner with Prima Coffee. You go to their website, again, that's prima-coffee.com. Reach out to them and see how they can help you wherever you are in your coffee journey. Again, I can't recommend highly enough, prima-coffee.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. That is the line of plant-based performance beverages that are the leader in plant-based beverages worldwide. And why is that? It's because they do perform amazingly on the bar. And that is from a lot of research and development, a lot of listening to the community and taking action on what they learn. These are designed for the professional barista and by baristas, in the sense that they get a lot of feedback from the community before these hit your shelves, so that you know whenever you're using their products on your bar, you're going to get a plant-based beverage that stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome latte art ready texture, and it keeps the flavor balance focused on the coffee. Your customers are so going to appreciate that, and I think you are also. Just try it out on your bar for yourself and see what I mean. Go to their website, pacificfoods.com. You just follow the link in the show notes here to take you to the food service section, and see how the Pacific Barista Series can really help elevate the plant-based offerings in your shop. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about cold brew, a really appropriate topic as the season for cold brew is really ramping up, and as certain economies start to open back up also, people are going to be getting out, and that iced beverages in your shop are just going to start getting more and more requested. So getting on top of your cold brew game is going to be of utmost concern, and that is why we have our guest here today. Matt Bushman is the co-founder of Alto Cold Brew, an innovative cold brew product company based out of Riverside, California. Their mission is to help you elevate your cold brew, and that is through their innovative products, their unique perspective on cold brew, and what you can do with cold brew, and also through shared knowledge and education. So not only do they provide you with great equipment for cold brew, including their industry-leading and flagship product, the Alto Cold Brew Filter. Matt speaks at Coffee Fest on cold brew, but also recently has helped start the U.S. Cold Brew Championships. They have a deep passion for cold brew, and it shows in their content, in their products. And in this conversation today, we are going to be diving deep into the subject of cold brew and how we can raise our game and offer our customers a elevated experience that maybe they haven't had before. So in this conversation, we'll be, of course, discussing the basics of a great cold brew setup. We'll talk about logistics and operations that will help you scale your cold brew, systems to help keep that quality in line, creative menu ideas, sanitation concerns, cold brew in the time of COVID. There is just a lot that we discuss in this conversation, and Matt really offers some great insights and tips and tools for us to elevate our cold brew, which is what they are all about at Alto Cold Brew. So I hope you're ready to learn a lot and raise your game. Here now is my conversation on elevating your cold brew with Matt Bushman. Well, Matt, thanks very much for being on the show. I'm excited to talk about cold brew today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is one of the first podcasts I ever listened to in coffee, so I'm excited to be here.
Oh, sweet. I didn't know that. Well, what an honor. You know, Alto has really made a name for itself in cold brew. I've been able to see you all around at Coffee Fest, and you got a great product and are very passionate about cold brew. And this is the season as we enter, exit spring and enter summer. Even amidst this crisis, we're still, we're looking to iced beverages, we're looking to cold brew, and I'm excited again to talk about this. So I wonder if we might start just by talking a little bit about Alto Cold Brew. What is it about, and why this passion for cold brew?
Yeah, so Alto Cold Brew came about out of really just necessity. We were helping a buddy who runs Arcade Coffee Roasters in Riverside, California, make cold brew. And it was something that he was kind of struggling to keep up with and really wondering where cold brew fit in his shop. And I had been such an advocate and passionate supporter of cold brew because it was the first coffee I ever learned to drink black. When I was trying to cut out dairy and trying to cut out sugar, cold brew was a little bit smoother, a little bit sweeter for me, and something that I really enjoyed. So when he said he was thinking about, kind of changing it or maybe scaling back on the cold brew, me and a buddy of mine, Joey, who's my co-founder, said, "No, we'll jump in and help you out." So nights and weekends, we'd help him brew cold brew. We'd take some home, and that was, part of the payment of the transaction. And that's how we kind of kept cold brew alive for his shop. But it also gave us a ton of exposure to working with cold brew and seeing what that brewing process and serving process is like. And frankly, that's what gave us the idea for Alto Cold Brew. It was founded originally just on improving the filters, but ultimately we realized our mission was elevating the craft of cold brew. We were founded in 2016, had a little bit of work there, but we really started up in 2017. And then ultimately we came to learn that our mission should be expanded slightly. And our mission became to help others elevate the craft of cold brew. Because the idea isn't that we're serving our own cold brew or putting out a competitive product in the market. We're a product company that sells and equips specialty coffee shops. We sell and equip restaurants. We sell and equip all sorts of different people, even the home enthusiasts for cold brew. And that's really our job. And so we came to realize that it wasn't just elevating the craft, but it was to help others elevate the craft. So that comes not only through our products, but I end up speaking at some of the conventions that you mentioned. We do the Coffee Fest and we do the FCA conventions, other local Southern California cold brew competitions. But also we helped found this year U.S. Cold Brew Championships and the competitions around helping people elevate the craft of cold brew. I think one of the best things that specialty coffee does in craft beer are like the competitions, and that's something that we wanted to really bring to the forefront of cold brew. And that's really what we're all about, is to help others elevate the craft of cold brew.
Nice. Yeah, I'm all for elevating any craft, and cold brew is one of those segments of the market that when it first came on the scene, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people thought it was going to be a fad. I mean, it's been around for quite a long time. And I remember back, 20 years ago, doing, versions of cold brew on the bar for, lattes that we were doing at a shop way back when. But with the ready to drink stuff and all of the other innovations that have happened with cold brew, it's obviously here to stay. And it is definitely something we need to always be looking to elevate. So when you look at the world of cold brew, and you've been able to see such a wide variety through your clients, the people you work with, the people who you talk to at trade shows, etc. What do you think is the most exciting thing about the world of cold brew right now, and how have you seen it grow since you started the company?
Yeah, I think you alluded to it quite a bit, but the idea that cold brew, I think, was a little bit more kind of a commodity, a bit of an afterthought, maybe the last item on the menu at a lot of coffee shops for a long time. I think it's really exploded. It's risen in popularity. I think part of that is due to the bigger chains, but also part of that is the majority really is the embrace of independent coffee shops, because they're the ones who are truly doing the innovation and pushing and growing the market. And those big chains are following suit, but they're also raising public awareness outside of just the world of specialty coffee. So I think that really helps. It's kind of like that rising tide lifting all boats for cold brew. It really has exploded. As far as the things I'm most excited about, we first started, one of the only shops around that I knew was doing mocktails. And mocktails, I would say, is like you would do cold brew, you would do some bitters, maybe some simple syrups and a garnish. And it was really more of a specialty craft beverage. The one that comes to mind most frequently is like a cold brew old fashioned, but there's dozens of different mocktails. And when I went out to different shops, I was surprised that no one was doing anything like that. I was like, this is so good. You already have all the ingredients on site. Why isn't this something you guys are looking more into? And I really see that exploding right now. And I see home brewing exploding to a large degree that has frankly surprised me, because home brewing is so easy. Cold brew at its core is very, very simple. It is steeping coffee at lower cold temperatures. And people steep tea all the time, and there's really not much more to it than that. And cold brew has been such kind of like a mystery, like a black box for a lot of people for a long time. And when you tell them, you just need to find a filter bag or some sort of a piece of equipment with a filter in it that can steep coffee, and you filter the grounds back out, you've just made cold brew. People can get, one, really creative on how they decide to do that, but two, pretty excited with how easy it is. And cold brew has so many advantages that the average home person doesn't really get their head around right away, because cold brew, especially if it's taken in bulk from a shop or brewed at home, can be kept for a week in the refrigerator, can be taken to the office, can be taken on a road trip, can travel and store in ways that other coffee really can't. It's not quite as easy. You don't have to bring as much tools and equipment with you as you can with cold brew. And you can bring your favorite shop's cold brew really anywhere you want. And you talk about summer, but take it to the beach, take it camping, take it on a road trip, and you can enjoy your favorite coffee, right there on the go. And that pretty much expands specialty coffee into a whole new world that I find really exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting, because it does open up the channels for us to, get a whole new, maybe not new, but a wider segment of people. And it's really, we're seeing now, especially, that being resilient as a company means you have lots of different channels through which your product can be purchased or enjoyed. And so it has this kind of flexibility that other products that we do that are very, very specialized and delicious and amazing in the store,
right,
they can't travel the same, they can't be enjoyed the same way. And we're kind of embracing that, and it's great. I know the shop I work in does mocktails and signature beverages with cold brew and with espresso, but cold brew is so versatile. And once you get a good coffee that you think really is landing for you on your palate for the cold brew process, the world's yours, really.
That's right. Yeah, it's a great start.
Yeah, exactly. So now I want to talk a little bit about when we're looking to prepare ourselves as retailers. We are sort of that point where the shop that supplies the coffee, the cold brew, making equipment if they're brewing cold brew at home, or the cold brew beverage itself if they're just coming to us for the product. So setting up a system to be able to do it well in the stores is really of paramount importance. And I think everybody is, kind of thinking right now, what does my setup look like in the store? For a lot of people, they've maybe cobbled together what they can last minute during this crisis. But I want to ask you to talk a little bit about the basics of a good cold brew setup as we look to facilitate people's enjoyment of cold brew as retailers.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that when people buy their espresso machines and sometimes even their batch brewers, they look at the amount of equipment or money they've spent on equipment, and it seems intimidating maybe to get even more equipment. I need more. Maybe I'll just see what I can do with what I've already bought. But cold brew, like I said, is so simple that people do it. The most people can start up with cold brew equipment for between $100 and $200. That typically includes a cold brew bucket, a set of filters. It's like a food grade plastic bucket is the cheapest way to kind of get your feet wet into cold brew. And it usually comes with filters, and that's enough to really get started. And many of the biggest shops, all the way up to Starbucks, use a plastic bucket and a filter, all the way down to specialty coffee shops submitting their coffees to competitions are doing it that way. So that at the very earliest entry level point is enough to get cold brew going in your shop. And what we've seen works really well is when they expand it, a lot of shops will just go, okay, well, we'll do two buckets now. We'll do 4 buckets and 8. And I think that's where people end up going wrong, because at a certain point, you lose the consistency per batch, and it's so much more work to manage 8, 4, 6, 8 small buckets. That time that people should really be considering looking at going towards larger brewing systems. And that's been a bit of a newer onset in the market, is the larger brewing systems. A lot of people will attempt to repurpose beer brewing equipment or cobble together their own kind of stainless steel buckets from where they might find it. But we ended up partnering with a company out of Southern California called Cold Brew Avenue. And we were filter innovators. That was our deal. And they were really good at stainless steel buckets. So we didn't really want to try to reinvent that wheel or try to improve what they did. But what they do is they have a 50-gallon brewer. So instead of doing 10 5-gallon buckets all around your shop and taking up all your floor space and being such a pain to deal with and store and wash and manage, you can brew it all in one 50-gallon brewer. But you also get that so much more consistency when you brew it in a large batch versus attempting to brew a bunch of smaller batches. You have to get each one perfect, as opposed to when you can brew it in a larger batch, any slight variations kind of get averaged out and you're getting the same consistent brew each time. So a lot of the shops that we work with will actually have 1 or 2 big 50-gallon tanks, brew it, and then keg it from there and take it around to all their shops. One of the things that people struggle with cold brew is consistency, especially if your company has 2 locations, 3 locations, deliver to sites, deliver to offices, deliver to events. Sometimes it's harder for them to maintain that consistency across all of their different platforms. And like you mentioned, we're seeing now people are taking bulk cold brew home to keep it consistent. I think one of the things that we recommend is to go with a larger brewing system, brew larger volumes at a time, and really maintain that quality and consistency, as opposed to attempting to do just infinitely more smaller batches.
Okay, so here's some questions for you, and I think that's a great piece of advice, and it's something that when I was former job in charge of like batching that stuff, we got like large stainless steel piece of equipment to do the very same thing, because managing all those buckets was it was really, a pain in the butt, really.
Yeah.
And, my question though is twofold. Actually, I have two questions. One is, what are the inconsistencies, or what actually contributes to the inconsistencies most often in cold brew when it's done, when you're talking about these traditional 5-gallon bucket batches, et cetera, or just generally what the inconsistencies are, how those happen. And then, it seems like there are some advantages and disadvantages of having a large system versus a small one, in that the central, maybe you don't have space, for a larger
Right.
system. So I guess maybe that's just a comment on that, but maybe speak to those two things, because I'm really curious about how these inconsistencies rear their ugly heads in cold brew.
Sure. Well, I think one of the things I do a lot is try to remind people of something similar in specialty coffee. So when people have a V60 brewing recipe that they try to follow very closely, the idea is most people will write it down until they fully memorize it. They'll write it down and make that a shop standard. Here's how everyone at the shop is doing this thing. Well, what we found was almost nobody does that in written format, or very few people do that in written format with cold brew. And what we're finding is variations in the recipes, or people's recollection of the recipes, were changing the consistency of the coffee. And so one of the first things we did is we developed and shipped for maybe 2 years, just like a cold brew checklist. It was a blank thing, a blank piece of paper people could fill out and say, here is how our shop does cold brew. And people could fill it out, check it off. You laminate it and you can kind of check them off and wipe it when you're done. But the idea being, people just need to do the exact same thing every time. But if you attempt to do the same thing 10 small times, you can imagine variations in the amount of saturation, for instance, your beans get. If someone messes with the amount of water that gets put in, it's slightly different each time. You're getting differences in concentration. If some shops end up hot blooming is a term that means you're putting a little bit of hot water on. Sometimes it's as little as 30 seconds to 60 seconds at the beginning to start to activate some of the different aromas that pure cold brewing doesn't activate. And the amount of time that you hot bloom is a significant variable in all of this. And sometimes when you're fussing with 10 buckets, even your harvest times can vary, because what ends up happening is maybe you set up all 10 at the same time, but you're pulling them one at a time, or vice versa. Maybe you fill them all up at different times and you harvest them all at the same time. So all of those things every one of those variables you're considering, right? Brew time, agitation, saturation, amount of water, all of those things have potential for inconsistency. And if you do 5 or 10 small batches, that has a higher chance to rear its head as opposed to doing one big batch. And then furthermore, just to hit on the inconsistency one, if you have different shops brewing their own, unless their water is exactly the same, you might just get the natural variation in water from shop to shop. And so a lot of shops like that idea of centralized brewing as a way to keep it consistent across shops, just to mitigate the different water types. It's a big deal in Southern California. I don't know how much it is for everyone else, but water is different between different areas out here. So that's an inconsistency that pops up. But you are right. There are certain shops that they just don't have the space for something so big. And I would just encourage them to be as careful as they can with their checklist, as careful as they can with the recipe, and the training in people following that recipe. I mean, that's kind of the only thing left to do if space is at an absolute premium.
I'm a big fan of checklists. We have episodes on checklists here.
That's right.
And so, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you just need to stay on top of those, methods that increase the chance of having variability. Saturation seems like a really big one to me. Like, with the buckets, there's either people who just drop a big bag of dry coffee into the water and let it soak overnight. My personal go-to, I don't know how you feel about this, but my thing is I want to stir and saturate everything 100% and then tie it off and put it in. But I mean, what do you think about something like that? Is it just your choice what you think tastes good, or is one a little bit more bang for your buck in terms of cold brew methodology? Do we fully saturate or just osmosis, let it soak?
So, I mean, I think that I don't like ever to tell somebody do it this way. I do like to encourage people to do it the way they like the best. But what I would always point out to them is if you are not getting full saturation, if you just put the bag, tie it up, and then hope the water gets to the middle and back out, you may not be getting the most amount of coffee out. So you have a lower extraction rate. You end up spending more coffee and not getting as much cold brew out. So there's a financial element to that, but you also have even some extraction elements to that, where if you're doing a pour over and at the end you realized half your coffee never got exposed to water, you would expect a different cup of coffee than if it was all exposed to water. And so we recommend that exact same method that you just described. We have the bag, we recommend the bag open, typically maybe 4 to 5 pounds of coffee, ground coffee in the bag, wet it from inside the bag, agitate and stir it inside the bag, and then tie it off. If you do that, everything's pre-wet. It has a much better shot at remaining consistent and have a consistent extraction and agitation, saturation really, than if you were to hope that it gets in from the outside. Because we've actually pulled batches before where the inside's dry, right? Because you imagine a big clump of coffee, water has to go a long way. You know, and if you're not agitating it, you're not guaranteed to get it all the way to the middle. And as a matter of fact, on that note, we have a lot of people who do bigger batches say, hey, I know your bags are for 5 to 10 pounds, your filter bags, that's what we do, filter bags are for 5 to 10 pounds. Can you make me one for 50 pounds? And I said, I could, but how are you going to agitate 50 pounds of coffee? How are you going to make sure the water gets all the way into the middle and all the way back out? What we recommend in those cases is 2 bags, 3 bags, 4 bags separate within the larger brewing vessel, because you need to get that water movement through your coffee. And the bigger the clump you put in one area, the less likely you're going to get full extraction out of, the coffee you're putting in there.
That makes sense. And even pour over methods now, most pour over methods are recommending stirring your slurry in the beginning, and full saturation is definitely seems like the best way to go. And even the thing that people might say is, well, you can get more cold brew out of the batch because you're not soaking up that water's not soaking into that coffee as much, so the yield is more. But I mean, if you start at the beginning, you get if you get a higher extraction, you just adjust your recipe, so you're actually maybe using less. You have a more concentrated concentrate, and you use less than what you normally would with your weaker concentrate. So
that's right.
It seems like you would need to really investigate your process, which it doesn't seem like a lot of people do, because cold brew seems like such an easy process, and it is an easy process that there's not as much thought put into it as there should be.
I agree with that. And that's why when we came out with that, we were trying to think of all the variables. We ended up with about 15 different variables that need to be considered for cold brew. And we think, wait, you just throw old coffee in a bucket in the corner and it's going to turn into cold brew. And there's so many more variables to consider that we recommend tracking. And that's exactly right. You do need to really consider all of those different things in order to get a consistent product. And that's really too what I think specialty coffee does well. They standardize and they share what good practice is. And here's what we should do for water temperature and even water characteristics. And here's what we should do for agitation, brew time, stir time. All that stuff really helps elevate the craft of coffee, and we're trying to be a part of that for cold brew and contribute in the ways that we can for cold brew. And one of the things we recommend people do is small batch testing, and especially more for taste than process. It is hard to get like perfect dilution rates on smaller batches, but people sometimes don't want to dial in their cold brew, because what are they going to do with 5-gallon test batch, right? Or multiple 5-gallon test batches if it doesn't turn out right. But especially when people are trying coffee to put into cold brew, we recommend just, hey, use a smaller filter, use a home filter. put less coffee in, but at least you get a sense of what that cold brew is going to taste like without having to brew 5 gallons at a time to do that. So one of the things we did is we actually came out with like a cold brew cupping protocol. Just like, this is how, if you wanted to cup a lot of different kinds of cold brews, this is what it might look like if you were going to cup in the same way that people cup hot coffee. And it's interesting because that concept, most people have never even really thought about the idea of tasting 8 cold brews next to each other and trying to discern the differences and pick out what they like and don't like about different blends or single origins. But it's possible in smaller batches and really prohibitive in big batches.
Oh, yeah. That's why we have sample roasters in the roastery.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
Something that strikes me as we're talking about this, we're talking about tasting the cold brew, is your mindset towards cold brew has to be that of a craft beverage like anything else, or else you will have this mentality that is essentially like, well, at least we don't need to think about this.
Right.
Which, guilty as charged. I've certainly had that thought too. And to be honest, if we're being honest, there's a lot more forgiveness in cold brew than there is other methods, and more forgivable palates in terms of when the customer is going to be able to detect that maybe there was like a half gallon less water in the cold brew, 5-gallon batch. Not most of the time. But they will over time notice something is different if you let it go. So it seems like a compounding effect. If you're not vigilant, you're going to allow it to go further and further than it needs to. And consistency is one of the things I think people like about cold brew, right? I mean,
yes.
That seems to be its calling card.
It is, yeah. I think consistency and mildness to me are the 2 number 1 things that people really like. My own journey into specialty coffee is something that mirrors a lot of the people that I talk to when I go to these different shows. And because I'm an engineer, I'm a civil engineer by trade. I do commuter railroad work in Southern California. I'm surrounded by office coffee all the time, and it was undrinkable in its normal black form. And so to cut dairy and sugar was nearly impossible. But what I ended up finding was that cold brew, I could drink black in a way that I couldn't even drink their, espresso or filter coffee black. And that really helped my palate, I guess, transition into what specialty coffee could offer in a way that going maybe straight into black coffee, I'm not sure I could have made that jump. And so I think that because it's so consistent, because it's so mild, it really is a common entry point into specialty coffee.
Okay, let's say that we get all of our cold brew dialed in. We've tasted it. We know what blend we want to use. We are saturating all of our coffee, and everyone's got the checklist. We're good to go. We've got the product. Now, I wonder, in terms of what happens to the cold brew after that, where do you see the best? What do you see the best people doing with their cold brew afterwards? I know you mentioned mocktails and things like that, but after the production of the cold brew, if you were in a coffee shop with somebody, what would you say? Hey, you want to have a winning cold brew program in your coffee shop? Here's some elements that are really going to help you thrive in this.
Yeah, I think that the idea with cold brew, what I would encourage someone to do is really look down their espresso menu and see what their espresso menu has to offer. And typically what you'll see is about half the menu is people's filter coffee and half the menu is their espresso coffee and their espresso-based drinks. A lot of shops get really creative, honey cinnamon lattes and all sorts of espresso and tonic and different things because they're using espresso as a base, and they're really getting creative around it with what's around their shop and what they've seen, sometimes blending in stuff from restaurants or bars. And I would say that cold brew deserves that same amount of attention. So to have a successful cold brew program, I think the worst thing you could do is offer a single cold brew. So the first thing we tell people to consider is offer a couple different cold brews. We have shops around here that offer cold brew flights. They have 2 or 3 cold brews on tap. You can buy a sample of all 3 of them to taste them side by side. That's something that is very uncommon in coffee, is to have a flight, 3 different espresso shots lined up next to each other, and you try them all. That would be very uncommon in a coffee shop. But cold brew flights make a lot of sense because of the nature of cold brew. So if you can offer more variety, then you can offer, flights. Maybe that's something that people can then consider taking home. But as far as expanding the menu, you have so many simple syrups. Bitters are not difficult, and considering like a garnish on a mocktail, um, and it could be like also, craft lattes are incredibly popular. I think they're popular at both specialty shops and large chains, and people are just finding that cold brew is a very good, solid base to build a lot of different creative drinks on. And we've seen people go seasonal with it, right? You can kind of do like the fall drink, the winter drink, the spring drink. You can have baristas do like little competitions, like a monthly whatever. This is, Steve's favorite, and then this is his one that we're featuring this month, because then people get to see something different and try something new. A lot of times people at coffee shops will come and get the same thing for a month, and every now and then they might see something like, I'd be interested actually in trying that. The more options you can give them, I think the better. But the encouragement is there's so many different ingredients you probably already have around the shop or would not be expensive to get that could really make, some interesting cold brew drinks.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And the cold brew flights, that's really interesting. I've never, that's something that would be worth investing some thought into. At least just having maybe one more, because we do have, espresso on the bar. We usually a coffee shop, especially coffee shop, will typically have two grinders. Like they'll have a single origin or a couple of different blends to use, one for milk, one for espresso. And when you are led by the desire of your customer, if you're paying attention to what they're buying, then you offer them variation and innovation within something that they're already a big fan of. They'll probably be an even bigger fan of that.
That's right. And it also gives your barista an opportunity to interact with them. I mean, some shops are production. You go through times where it's a morning rush. But if it's, a little bit of a slower point in the middle of the day, it gives you, you're a barista, an opportunity, or even your roaster really, to say, this is what it tastes like. This is what you're tasting in these. And it's almost like a little mini cupping for your customer. They might have their eyes open to something they didn't even know that they liked because they just like what they've always ordered and they're comfortable there. But it gives your barista a chance to interact and educate your customers there. And then one other type of flight that I've seen is people will sometimes do a bit of batch coffee, an espresso based drink, and a cold brew, all of the same, bean, all of the same roast. And if you have a roast that you think can hold up across all those three varieties, that's also a really interesting experience. It can be charged at a premium price because where else are you going to get that experience? It's not the same thing as just like, hey, fill up my 32 ouncer with cold brew and I'm going to get to work. It really is a unique experience to try different cold brews side by side or try the same roast in a number of different preparations.
Yeah, I love it. And it might sound funny, but I almost think that as we talk about this, the caveat should be made, like, don't make cold brew so inaccessible to people like we've done with espresso for so long. Because we're talking about like, okay, well, and a comment you made innocently enough, like, fill up my 32 ounce container of cold brew and I want to go to work. Totally legit. And elevating cold brew, not at the expense of people who just want a cold brew because they just want that cup of cold brew. It's just like somebody says, I just want a cup of coffee. And we're not there to ridicule them for just not having our palate or getting our flight. So we need to keep it accessible, right?
Yeah, and it's an opportunity because a lot of the things I said is, get cold brew for office coffee, cold brew, take a bunch to. I'm all about that. I did that and do that still is take a bunch of coffee home. But it's also like a unique added on experience. Sometimes shops will say you can have a flight as part of your like growler order. Pick which one you like, and then you can take that one home, right? So you can do both, and it's just a way to both upsell. The take home coffee is a really unique concept for a lot of coffee shops because you don't take home too much hot coffee. Sometimes you take one of those to go things to serve at an event, but it usually doesn't last a day or a week. But take home coffee for cold brew is well within your reach. So to expand the ticket of someone who's going to stay there, but also to maybe put a drink in the hand of somebody who's going to take a bunch of cold brew and go. I think there's a lot of opportunity.
So as we're talking about this, I think in both of our minds, maybe there's this image of the shop that's not hampered with this whole tricky COVID situation.
Sure.
So what we can do in the future with our cold brew programs, of course, you can do any of these ideas and all of them. But right now, what most people are doing is they're doing takeaway. They're doing maybe really simple takes on things so that they can make a lot of it. Half gallons of iced lattes that either use espresso or, like the shop I work in, using a cold brew as a base for that. But also half gallons of cold brew. So what are people, how are people responding through this crisis when it comes to cold brew, and what are your thoughts on this bulk cold brew, bulk lattes, and how things are shaping up right now?
Yeah, I think that shops have to be adaptable right now. We're trying to be adaptable. I think everyone is really trying to figure out what it's like to move forward during this crisis. And so one of the two most successful things we've seen, one of which you've mentioned, is like kind of doing that bulk take home, bulk cold brew take home, bulk latte take home, has been really successful. I know for a lot of shops around here, and it sounds like around you also, because people still do want their cold brew, but sometimes, or even just their coffee from your shop, but sometimes it's hard for them to kind of get everyone in the car. For us, it's masks and kids and everything else. And so it is a lot to get down there many times per week. In coffee shops who are able to serve their customer with that one larger ticket, larger take home, is really popular where we are. And we've also seen just at Alto an incredible uptick in home brewing interest. And so that goes a couple different ways. Shops will buy home brew filters and put them on their shelf, or even just pair them with the bags of coffee that they have, and ask people to take it home and brew at home. It gives people a lot of flexibility, and it's not particularly difficult for them to take the beans, grind them, and brew it at home. We also do pre-filled packets as like a service to our shops. We had a number of shops ask, hey, can you just make the packet for us? And it wasn't really what we set out to do, but a lot of really great shops were interested in this program. And so it's this idea where they can just ship us beans. We fill, pack, seal, nitrogen flush, and then seal again. These little packets where people can just take it home and drop it in water. A lot of the bigger chains, you'll see this in like a grocery store kind of a deal. The bigger chains will have kind of cold brew pods or cold brew packets, but it wasn't really a service that was available to specialty coffee shops. So we helped them solve that problem. And what ultimately it comes down to is, how does coffee shops equip people to enjoy their coffee at home? And so, like you said, it's bringing cold brew home in bulk. It's brewing cold brew the traditional way at home, but it's also, can be pre-filled packets and equipping people to brew and enjoy their coffee at home. We've seen a lot of that.
That makes a lot of sense because there's so much brewing at home, regular coffee, hot coffee, and tutorials abound online,
That's
both
right.
for cold brew and for hot coffee, which is really fantastic. And it seems like, I don't know your take on this, but this is going to open up a whole new interest level when this is all said and done. When we're on the other side of this, it feels like we're going to experience a bump in whole bean, but also in the interest in home brewing.
I think so. I think people are finding out what they can do, and I think that they are, going to keep doing it. I think there's nothing at home that can replace the feeling of going to your favorite coffee shop, but I do think that there will be an increased amount of home brewing, and hopefully that means both more in shop and more at home, enjoyment of coffee.
Yeah, I'm a really big believer that that's going to happen too, and so we'll see what happens. But my last question to you here, and this has really been fun to talk about and informative. I really appreciate you coming on the show to share these things. It's going to help a lot of people. So one of the things that can really help people is some of the don'ts of cold brew. And, sometimes that centers around what we had already talked about, in terms of saturation and stuff like that, but also, especially as we're more conscientious these days of cleanliness, it's hygiene. I've noticed a lot of interesting hygiene practices with cold brew versus other methods, since there's not all this hot water to cover up a multitude of sins, so to speak. How do we approach sanitation and hygiene in cold brew, and maybe what are some of the other things that we should be aware of don't do that with cold brew?
Yeah, I think that the biggest don'ts of cold brew, in addition to the quality things we've talked about, really does filter around hygiene. And really the first place to look for cold brew has to be the filters. That's where you have the potential. So the filters, I mean, just to take one half a step back, cold brew is steeped in either a bucket or in a filter bag itself, and then the coffee is removed and filtered out, and then cold brew is remaining. What you do with that filter determines how hygienic your entire process is. So there's a lot of different filters on the market. So starting kind of from what I would say is the biggest don't is in like kind of the cloth or cotton type of arrangement. We've heard of shops switching to us from pillowcases, literal pillowcases, because that's what they were using. That's what they were told to use.
I think the coffee got a softer mouthfeel.
It has a funky, pulpy mouthfeel. I can't imagine what that would do to their coffee, but it's not just even the taste, because what they're doing, if you can't at least, turn whatever your filter is, turn it inside out, get all the coffee off, but you have to then sanitize it perfectly. You have to dry it perfectly. You have to prepare it for storage and store it perfectly, and then get it back out and handle it again perfectly. So any filter that you reuse has a chance of potentially recontaminating what you're working with. And that's one of the biggest things that we see as an issue is if your filter is if your filter is reusable, I think that's a great thing in general. Things can be reusable, but when you're reintroducing old, potentially wet, potentially moldy coffee grounds that have been stuck in the tiniest parts of your filter back into the new batch, that's when you start getting into really dangerous territory with food and health and safety. And so our filters, when we invented them, it's a proprietary material, but when we were in the development phase of our filters, we created a checklist of 10 things that we wanted out of our filters, and we hit 9 of them. They're easier to work with. We believe they have better taste. They're more convenient, but they're stronger than what we had seen on the market. But one of the biggest ones was sanitation. Our only miss was that they weren't reusable. And you run into this really interesting problem, right? Where you kind of almost have to pick between sanitation and reusability, because what our filters are is our single use filters. And so people say, oh man, I don't want to have to throw them away each time. That's fine and admirable. That it really is. But what ends up happening is then you have to guarantee your sanitation every batch, every employee, every storage time, as opposed to coming out with a fresh, clean, fully sanitized filter, using it once and throwing it away. No chance for that filter to recontaminate in any way your next batch. And the sanitation has been a huge thing that we've been leaning on as part of the development process of this. And I think now more than ever, that becomes more important. And people are starting to recognize it. And I think that now's the time for people to kind of take a second look at their process, whether it's cloth or nylon mesh or even stainless steel is probably the best reusable filter if you're going to use that. Is the easiest to clean, but it still eventually will turn colors. It'll still eventually clog. And that's what we just want to encourage people to take the most amount of care towards is, if you're going to use a reusable one, you have to clean it, because that's where your hygienic issues come into play.
Like clean it with a cleaner, like a
Absolutely.
cleaner that disinfects.
And then if it's like any kind of a material, whether it's nylon mesh or cloth, you have to somehow find a way to dry it sanitary, because we've been into shops where they're like on a clothesline, right? These filter bags, the reusable portion, are on a a clothesline, and who knows what kind of blows in and out of that shop after the cleaners hit it. and then they'll store it loose and open on a shelf, and who knows what touches that shelf in the meantime before you dip it into the next batch of cold brew. And I think that all of these things now more than ever lends itself towards hygiene. So as far as cold brew cleaner, there's a cold brew cleaner on the market right now from Cold Brew Avenue that they use, that they recommend for their stainless steel. And so any kind of food safe, food grade, restaurant grade container cleaner is important, but those containers are meant, food grade containers, whether it's plastic or stainless, are meant to be reused and fully sanitized. It's really the filters. That's where I think the biggest danger creeps in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when it comes to hygiene, obviously this is super important, and just kind of think critically about what the context is of, like you were saying, like when you're shoving these things into corners, and it's like the classic mistake people make with mops, for example. Like people store a mop just bunched up, totally wet, not wrung out overnight. They don't fan out I'm very particular about this.
Right.
They don't fan it out to air out and things like that. So, and then just thinking critically about how you're treating these products will lead you to say, oh gosh, I've just been doing this for so long, never taken the time to question why or how, or is it even a good idea?
Right.
I'm personally huge fan of Ernex and all their products, and
That's right.
I think it's magic. Yeah, I use Cafiza. I would brush my teeth with it if I could.
I think they're the ones behind the Cold Brew Avenue version as well. I think they partnered
cool.
with Ernex on that. It's a 1-2-3 Cold Brew, but also Ernex has one that's very similar.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people feel that they can clean their cold brew equipment with Cafiza, for example, but it doesn't disinfect. And so you would need something that actually disinfects the stuff, so that next time there's no danger. Just the way we're all so sensitive about germs right now. Hey, this is a time to start thinking, maybe take an extra step. Just don't Cafiza your equipment. Make sure that you're actually cleaning it with cleaner, like you said, so everyone's a little safer when they're enjoying your cold brew.
That's right.
What other things are we prone to do that would really tank us when it comes to a cold brew?
I think storage time is, something that get a lot of people in trouble. And that's a really hard one, because people don't want to brew 5 gallons of cold brew and dump part of it. That goes to waste. That's money down the drain. But just like you wouldn't serve old hot coffee or a batch for a couple days, or even shouldn't really serve for a couple hours, it's losing its freshness and quality. You got to be careful on the amount of time you're willing to serve and keep cold brew. And I think that that's something that, either by kind of inactivity, and I don't want to say quite laziness, but just like not keeping track of it, is how long that cold brew has been in there. But also just for economic reasons, you don't want either of those two things to creep in. So we sell little batch labels. People use masking tape. People use chalk or dry erase, anything to label the date and time that their keg was filled. Because if you can do that, then each individual shop will go through, and they should be able to know when the time is that they're no longer going to be serving that cold brew. And I think that shops should have a much higher bar for that than at home. I've seen people at home, recommend a week or two. But as far as shops, I think we see most shops trying to go through their cold brew in maybe 2 to 4 days. And I think that's probably good. You want to serve fresh product to your customer, and you want to serve the highest quality. And the longer it waits, it's hard to give an exact date and time based on a million different potential variables
you knew my next
temperature
question.
And time. It really is. Temperature, time, method of preparation, if anything was introduced or wasn't, how many times it's been gotten out and put back. It really is difficult to give one definitive answer. But the shorter you make that time, you're just closing the door on the window for anything bad to happen. So I think one of the ways that shops can improve their hygiene in that respect is to not brew 2 weeks worth of of cold brew, and hope that it was right. Brew a few days, and then you can stay ahead of it, but try not to let it sit too long, because it degrades not only in quality, but also introduces a hygienic risk.
Oh, interesting. So, you could taste the difference too if you wanted to. You could probably just test how long it takes for the cold brew to degrade. Not that you should be trying to extend it, you should be trying to sell out of it, like you said, as fast as you possibly can. But one of the benefits of cold brew in a lot of people's minds, and this is something that I think about too, is it lasts longer, is in its concentrated form. And so I've been prone to tell people, hey, you've got like up to 2 weeks you could keep this concentrate and it'll be fine. And maybe technically it is, but
it will be.
Right. So, I mean, when we say fine, I guess the definition starts to slip a little bit as the weeks go on, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and is there truth to the idea that when you cut the cold brew with water, like, half and half is typical, it shortens the life even more?
Yeah, I've heard that, and I haven't seen, and we haven't been able to replicate that in any kind of a study. I've had people ask me too, and we've attempted to study this, where you dilute after can shorten the life, but also whether you dilute after or brew to ready to drink, brew to your desired concentration or dilute after. It's really difficult to tell a difference. I think that many of the shops that we work with, especially the specialty ones, attempt to brew to concentration as close as they can. But most of them will still polish off and reach a desired TDS with a little bit of introduced water to maintain that consistency. And that is actually one other thing that's worth checking is your TDS on each batch to make sure that you're getting the desired concentration.
That's a great recommendation. Yeah. So Matt, this has really been fantastic. What would you like to leave us with in terms of, parting words for the people embarking on their cold brew adventures in this particular season of, high sales of cold brew in the hot weather? How can we really knock this out of the park?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing right now is the idea of expanding your cold brew offerings. We talked about it a bunch, but the idea of having multiple cold brews, considering flights, considering take-home options, considering home brewing options or pre-filled packets, really just expand. My encouragement is to expand your cold brew offerings in a way that customers will find interesting and will want to try something new and different. Cold brew is something that can always be added on to a ticket, especially one of the take-home options that can increase your average sale price and also increase the amount of time, in instances per week, that customer is interacting with your coffee. So it really just is all about expanding cold brew, looking towards your, espresso-based drink menu for inspiration, looking to your employees for inspiration, because there's a lot of creativity out there, and cold brew is such a unique base to get to work with. If you're already brewing it, there's really no reason to not expand in your cold brew offerings. And so I think that's my biggest encouragement. And really, at the end of the day, I think people are going to have like this kind of pent up desire for cold brew and getting out in coffee shops. And so now's the time to prep. Now's the time to get ready for what those offerings are going to look like, because people are going to come out, and I think they're going to be excited to go back to their coffee shops and back to their restaurants in their lives. And this is the time to hit it, as you say, as summer's coming. And just the last reminder is our mission really is to help others elevate the craft of cold brew. And that's what we're here to do. So yeah, just excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Absolutely. Where can we find out more information? So like, what's your website and how can people get in touch with you?
Our website is altocoldbrew.com, and our Instagram handle is @altocoldbrew. Again, my name is Matt, so it's just Matt at Alto Cold Brew. My co-founder is Joey, and you can get, to him directly. We don't have a big call center or anything like that. It's us running a small, product company in the same way that a lot of coffee shop owners are running small coffee shops. And we enjoy that positioning and that relationship just because it's really similar to everyone that we work with. And so it's, we're available in any way you can get a hold of us, and we'd love to talk cold brew. It's our favorite thing.
It certainly sounds like it. Thank you so much, Matt. Again, this has really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that episode and that it was instructive and helpful to you. I encourage you to make a list of the things discussed here Talk about it with your team and see what makes sense for your cold brew program. Maybe you're doing some of these things already, but I'll tell you what, right now is a great time to just take an audit of all of your systems, including your cold brew, as it's going to be one of those featured items on your menu that people get all the time. And what better time than now to, look at gaining a quality edge with your cold brew program. So I'm really thankful that we got to talk with Matt today. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We appreciate your insights and all you're doing to help us elevate our cold brew. If you want to find out more information about Alto Cold Brew, just go to their website, altocoldbrew.com. You can reach out to them through there. Also, you can visit them on Instagram, Alto Cold Brew on Instagram. Really great stuff. Now, if you want to reach out to me, it's chris@keystotheshop.com. That's my email for comments, questions, concerns, feedback, all of that stuff. If you want to send me, funny videos or something like that, I'm game for that too. That's great. But yeah, I really do want to hear from you. I always enjoy hearing from the Keys to the Shop community. That's the email you can also use to inquire about Keys to the Shop consulting. If you're looking for counsel or training in your operations, even if you just want to set up over the phone consultation and coaching, that is also available. Just reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. It'd be a real pleasure to work with you. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope nothing but the best for you. And of course, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.